I am Naomi, 34 years old, and until recently, I thought I was living the pinnacle of Black excellence. My husband, Julian, is a lawyer at an elite Atlanta firm. I was flying first class to New York City when I glanced at the phone of the woman sitting beside me. There was a photo of my husband resting on her lap holding a toddler. Trying to hide my shock, I asked, "Is this your husband?" She smiled and said, "Yes. We have been together for 5 years and have 2 kids. He is the sweetest man." I smiled back. The moment I landed in New York City, I made one phone call and changed everything. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to burn down a toxic relationship to rebuild your life. To Julian and his mother, Beatrice's image is absolutely everything in this world. They constantly look down on my career thinking I run a struggling freelance blog. What they do not know is that I am the secret founder and CEO of Caldwell Holdings, a billion-dollar crisis management and investment firm. I keep my identity hidden to protect my mental peace and privacy. I was sitting in seat 2A sipping water when the woman in 2B picked up her phone. She was beautiful in a deliberate way, perfectly laid closure, and a designer tracksuit that screamed new money. Her screen lit up brightly. My eyes naturally drifted toward the light. The lock screen was a family portrait. A woman smiling brightly, a toddler on her lap, and a man wrapping his arms around both of them. The man was Julian, my husband of 7 years. I blinked, staring at the screen. It was undeniably him. He was wearing the custom navy suit I picked up from the dry cleaners last Tuesday. But what solidified the reality was the watch on his left wrist. A custom platinum Rolex Daytona. I knew every detail because I secretly bought it for his birthday last month using a third-party buyer. A normal woman might have caused a scene and demanded answers. But in my line of work dealing with hostile takeovers, you learn that emotion is the enemy of strategy. Silence gathers information. Anger only shows your hand. I turned toward her with a polite smile. "That is a beautiful family," I said. "Is that your husband?" She locked her phone and her face lit up. Yes, she beamed. "We have been together for 5 years. We have a 3-year-old and a baby who just turned 1. He is the absolute sweetest man in the world. 5 years, 2 kids. Julian had been living a double life while his mother Beatrice belittled me at Sunday dinner for not giving her a grandchild. "He looks very familiar," I said, keeping my voice conversational. "Is he a lawyer?" Her eyes widened. "Yes, he is. He works at a top firm in Atlanta. He is about to make partner, actually. We are flying out to celebrate. I am Sierra, by the way." "I am Naomi," I replied, shaking her hand. My heart was beating a slow, cold rhythm. "So if he works in Atlanta, how do you manage the distance?" "Oh, he flies up every weekend," Sierra explained happily, handing me the rope to hang them both. "He bought us this gorgeous penthouse in Tribeca. He fully funds my lifestyle so I can stay home and raise our boys. Julian believes a man should provide everything." I nodded thoughtfully. "That must be wonderful." "He is incredibly generous," Sierra continued, leaning in closer. "Honestly, I think he spoils us because of his past. His ex-wife was a total nightmare." My eyebrows raised slightly. "His ex-wife." "Yeah, they are legally separated." Sierra sighed, rolling her eyes. "She is this bitter career-obsessed woman who runs some failing internet blog. Barren. Failing internet blog. Legally separated." The lies were so deliberate. I had gone through 3 agonizing IVF rounds, crying myself to sleep while Julian held my hand. Now I was looking at the woman he chose to breed with while using our joint savings to fund her luxury life. "That sounds incredibly stressful for him," I said, dripping with fake sympathy. "It is a good thing he has you and the boys." "Exactly." Sierra smiled. A man like Julian needs someone who fits into elite circles. His ex-wife just never understood how to carry the legacy. I looked at the custom Rolex on the wrist of the man in the photo. The watch I paid for with money from the holding company I built from nothing. I am sure she will get exactly what she deserves, I said, maintaining a flawless smile. The pilot announced our descent into John F. Kennedy International Airport. Sierra spent the remaining 20 minutes showing me photos of the Tribeca penthouse. She bragged about the imported marble, the custom nursery, and the monthly allowance Julian provided. I realized Julian must have been siphoning hundreds of thousands of dollars to afford a penthouse in New York City. He was hiding money. And if he was hiding money, he was making a fatal mistake. The wheels touched the tarmac. "It was so lovely meeting you, Sierra," I said, gathering my designer tote bag. "I hope you and Julian have a wonderful time celebrating his promotion." "Thank you, Naomi," she replied brightly. "Maybe we will run into each other again in the city." "I guarantee it," I said quietly. I stepped off the plane and walked purposefully down the jet bridge. The moment my phone caught a signal, I dialed a heavily encrypted number. It rang twice before a deep professional voice answered. "Desmond speaking." Desmond was my lead corporate attorney and wealth manager. He was ruthless, brilliant, and entirely loyal to me. "Desmond, initiate a total financial lockdown," I said, returning to the cadence of a CEO. "Freeze every joint account tied to Julian. Block his access to the primary estate funds and cancel the black cards." "Consider it done," Naomi Desmond replied. "Has something happened?" "Julian has been financing a secret family in New York for 5 years," I stated. "He bought them a penthouse in Tribeca. He has been claiming we are legally separated and telling his mistress I am a barren failure." There was a brief pause. "I will begin the forensic audit immediately," Desmond said, his tone turning deadly serious. "If he purchased real estate in Tribeca, he is moving massive amounts of capital. We will track every cent." "I want to know where the money came from," I instructed. "Find the deed to the penthouse. Find the shell companies. Find the wire transfers." Julian thinks he is playing a struggling blogger. He forgot who he is actually married to. "Give me 10 minutes," Desmond said. "I will tear his financial history apart." I hung up and walked out into the crisp New York air. A black SUV was waiting for me. I climbed inside. I did not shed a single tear. The Julian I loved was an illusion, a facade designed to feed off my resources while maintaining his pristine image. He thought he could use my supposed infertility to justify his betrayal. He thought he could use my fake career as a punchline. He was about to learn the true definition of a hostile takeover. My phone vibrated in my hand. It was Desmond calling back much sooner than expected. "We have a situation," Naomi Desmond said, sounding genuinely shocked for the first time in years. "I found the deed to the Tribeca penthouse. Julian purchased it through a limited liability company called Sterling Legacy LLC. "So he used a shell company," I replied, looking out the window. "That is sloppy. We can pierce the corporate veil and seize the asset." "It is worse than sloppy," Desmond corrected. "He registered Sterling Legacy LLC, using the tax identification number from your initial consulting business. He transferred the property deed into a subsidiary that is technically owned by your parent corporation." A cold smile spread across my face as the harsh reality of his monumental stupidity finally set in. Julian tried to hide the home of his mistress inside what he thought was my worthless paperwork. "Are you telling me that my company legally owns the penthouse his mistress lives in?" I asked. "Legally and entirely," Desmond confirmed. "You could evict them tomorrow." "No," I said, leaning back against the leather seat. "Do not evict her yet. Let them get comfortable. Let Julian throw his partner's celebration. I want his law firm and his reputation to crumble in front of the people he wants to impress." "As you wish," Desmond replied. I will prepare the acquisition strategy. The war had begun and Julian had no idea he had already lost. A week later, the heavy, humid air of Atlanta felt different against my skin. It was Sunday, which meant the weekly performance of high society grace and passive-aggressive warfare was scheduled to begin. I sat at a sprawling table covered in crisp white linens and crystal at the Oakmont Country Club. The room was a sea of pastel suits, oversized church hats, and the suffocating perfume of old Southern money mixed with new Atlanta ambition. This was the post-church brunch, a sacred ritual for the elite, where reputations were polished and family secrets were buried under layers of expensive hollandaise sauce. Beatrice Sterling. My mother-in-law was holding court at the head of the table. She wore a tailored peach suit that looked like it had been surgically attached to her body, and a pearl necklace that probably cost more than most people made in a year. Next to her sat my older sister Vanessa. Vanessa was the golden child of the Caldwell family, the one who married a successful accountant and always knew exactly how to play the respectability politics game. She and Beatrice had formed a toxic alliance over the years, bonded by their mutual disdain for my apparent lack of ambition. I sat quietly at the opposite end of the table wearing a simple cream silk dress. To the untrained eye, it looked understated, even plain. Beatrice, of course, missed the fact that it was a custom piece from a private atelier in Milan. She only respected wealth she could read on a logo. You know, Naomi, Beatrice began, her voice slicing through the polite chatter of the surrounding tables. I saw a beautiful Carolina Herrera dress at Phipps Plaza the other day. It was on sale. I thought about buying it for you since Julian has his big partner announcement gala coming up. You really need to elevate your presentation, darling. The women at the adjacent tables subtly tilted their heads, their ears perked for the gossip. This was Beatrice's favorite sport, publicly diminishing me to elevate her son. I smiled, taking a slow, calculated sip of my sparkling water. Thank you, Beatrice, but I already have my wardrobe arranged for the evening. Beatrice sighed loudly, placing a hand over her chest, as if my response physically pained her. I am just trying to help you understand the gravity of this promotion, Naomi. Julian is about to be named senior partner. He is the youngest black man in the history of the firm to achieve this. He needs a wife who can carry the Sterling legacy with authority, not someone who spends her days typing away on her little laptop at the kitchen island pretending to run a business. Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with that familiar sibling malice disguised as concern. Naomi, we are just worried about you. You have been running that freelance blog for 5 years now. It is okay to admit when something is not working. Calvin and I were just talking about how much Julian carries the financial weight in your marriage. It must be so exhausting for him. If you need a small loan to keep your website running, you can just ask. I looked at my sister. The sister who shared my blood but had spent her entire adult life trying to tear me down because she could never handle the fact that I was the one who got into an Ivy League university while she stayed local. She wanted me to be the struggling artist so badly because it validated her safe, predictable choices. It is not about the money, Vanessa, Beatrice interjected, cutting off whatever fake pity my sister was about to offer. It is about the legacy. Julian is building an empire. And what is an empire without heirs? She turned her sharp gaze back to me, her eyes cold and merciless. 7 years, Naomi. 7 years of marriage, and you still have not given my son a child. You are 34 years old. Your biological clock is not just ticking, it is an alarm bell. A man like Julian needs a family. He deserves a family. I just pray to God every Sunday that he does not wake up one day and realize he wasted his prime years waiting for a barren woman to give him what he is owed. The silence that followed her statement was absolute. The clinking of silverware at our table stopped. Even the waiter refilling water glasses nearby froze. It was a vile, calculated strike designed to humiliate me in front of Atlanta's most influential gossips. They all knew about our IVF struggles. Beatrice was weaponizing my private pain for public sport. She expected me to shrink. She expected me to lower my eyes, apologize, or perhaps excuse myself to the restroom to cry. Vanessa was already preparing her face to look sympathetic, ready to play the comforting sister after helping deliver the blow. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I picked up my mimosa, the crystal glass cool against my steady fingers. I took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the sharp bite of the orange juice and champagne. I set the glass down gently, ensuring it did not make a single sound against the table. I leaned forward, resting my arms gracefully on the white linen. I am sure the sterling legacy is in exceptionally good hands. Beatrice, I said, my voice dropping to a calm conversational volume that forced everyone to lean in to hear me. After all, Julian already gave you 2 beautiful grandsons in New York. The words hung in the air, suspended like a guillotine blade before the drop. I watched the color instantly drain from Vanessa's face. She looked at me as if I had just spoken in tongues. Calvin, her husband, choked slightly on his coffee, coughing into his napkin. The surrounding tables seemed to collectively stop breathing. But it was Beatrice's reaction that gave me the final piece of the puzzle. Beatrice did not gasp in shock. She did not ask me what I was talking about. She did not demand an explanation or angrily defend her son's honor. Instead, her hand began to tremble violently. The heavy silver fork she was holding slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly against her fine china plate. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes, wide with sudden primal panic, darted frantically between me and the other women at the table. The perfectly poised matriarch of the Sterling family looked entirely terrifyingly trapped. In that split second, the realization hit me with the force of a freight train. She knew. Beatrice was not shocked by the revelation of the affair. She was completely, utterly terrified that I knew about it. The way her eyes flickered, the way her breathing shallowed, the way she did not immediately deny the existence of those 2 little boys. It all painted a devastatingly clear picture. My mother-in-law, the woman who had just publicly humiliated me for my inability to carry a child, had been actively hiding her son's secret family this entire time. She knew about Sierra. She knew about the Tribeca penthouse. She knew about the 3-year-old and the 1-year-old. She probably flew up to New York to visit them while I was sitting in sterile clinical waiting rooms, recovering from hormone injections and mourning failed embryo transfers. I looked at her tailored peach suit and her expensive pearls, and I felt a cold, absolute clarity wash over me. The Julian I knew was a monster, but Beatrice was the architect of his monstrous behavior. She had enabled him, covered for him, and then sat across from me at church brunch to twist the knife in my empty womb. "Are you all right, Beatrice?" I asked, my tone laced with dark amusement. "You look a little pale. Perhaps the hollandaise sauce is disagreeing with you." Naomi Vanessa stammered, her voice pitching high with anxiety. "What on earth are you talking about? What grandsons? Julian does not have any children. You are being hysterical." I shifted my gaze to my sister. The desperation in her defense was interesting. Vanessa was always quick to protect Julian's image because proximity to his success elevated her own social standing. But there was something else in her eyes. A frantic defensive energy that felt too sharp, too immediate. "I am not hysterical, Vanessa," I replied smoothly, picking up my napkin and dabbing the corners of my mouth. "I am simply acknowledging facts. Sierra is a lovely girl. A bit flashy, perhaps, but she seems very dedicated to raising Julian's boys in that Tribeca penthouse he bought for them. The one with the imported marble floors." Calvin stared at his wife, then at Beatrice. "Is this true?" he demanded, his voice rough. "Beatrice, does Julian have another family?" Beatrice finally found her voice, though it was a weak, raspy imitation of her usual commanding tone. "Naomi, this is highly inappropriate. You are having an episode. We are in public. You need to lower your voice and stop spreading malicious lies about my son. Lies? I smiled, leaning back in my chair. That is an interesting word choice, Beatrice, especially coming from a woman who has been receiving framed photographs of her secret grandchildren for the past 3 years. Did you think I would never find out? Did you think Julian was smart enough to hide a second life forever? I do not know what you are talking about, Beatrice hissed, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. You are deeply unwell, Naomi. The fertility treatments have clearly damaged your mind. I laughed, a short, sharp sound that cut through the tension. You can drop the act, Beatrice. The performance is over. Your son has been siphoning money to fund a mistress, and you have been sitting there smiling in my face, acting like the supportive mother-in-law while keeping his filthy secret. Vanessa slammed her hand on the table. Stop it, Naomi. You are embarrassing yourself. Julian is a brilliant lawyer. He would never do something so reckless. You are just jealous because he is succeeding and your little blog is failing. I looked at Vanessa, taking in her defensive posture, her flushed neck, her shaking hands. My sister was fighting far too hard for a man who was not her husband. And Desmond's forensic audit had uncovered more than just the shell company owning the penthouse. It had uncovered the exact pipeline Julian used to move the money without triggering fraud alerts on his firm's internal monitors. I looked at Calvin, who was watching his wife with growing suspicion. Then I looked back at Vanessa, my golden sister, the accountant's wife who ran a very specific charitable foundation. You are right, Vanessa, I said softly, my eyes locking onto hers. Julian is a brilliant lawyer. He would never be reckless enough to wire the money directly to Sierra. That would leave an obvious trail. He would need a proxy, someone he trusted, someone who hated me enough to help him hide it, someone who could easily launder $15,000 a month under the guise of charitable donations. Vanessa stopped breathing. The fake pity vanished from her face, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. I smiled, showing my teeth. Enjoy your brunch, ladies. The bill is on me. I did not immediately stand up to leave the table. I remained seated in my chair, watching the absolute panic wash over the faces of the women who had just spent the last 20 minutes trying to tear me down. The country club dining room around us continued its gentle hum of Sunday brunch conversation, but at our table the air had grown thick and suffocating. Beatrice stared at me, her mouth slightly open, her perfect composure completely shattered by the mention of her secret grandsons in New York. The color had drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and suddenly every bit of her 62 years. But Beatrice Sterling was a woman who had survived decades of high society warfare in Atlanta. She was not going to surrender easily. I watched the panic in her eyes slowly harden into a desperate, vicious defense. She slammed her hand down onto the crisp white tablecloth, rattling the crystal water glasses and causing the silver cutlery to clink loudly. You have lost your mind, Naomi! Beatrice hissed, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and manufactured outrage. She looked around the room to ensure no one at the neighboring tables was listening too closely before leaning in toward me. You are completely delusional. I do not know what kind of sick paranoid fantasy you have concocted in your head, but you need psychiatric help immediately. Julian does not have any children in New York. You are having a mental breakdown. It is those fertility drugs you have been pumping into your body for years. They have made you hysterical and completely detached from reality. I sat perfectly still, letting her hurl her venom. It was fascinating to watch her try to gaslight me, using the very trauma she had inflicted upon me. She was trying to convince me that my own grief over my infertility had driven me insane. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. Vanessa immediately jumped to her defense, sensing an opportunity to play the rational, supportive sister. She reached across the table and placed a comforting hand on Beatrice's arm before turning her sharp, judgmental gaze toward me. Naomi, you are embarrassing yourself, and you are embarrassing this family. Vanessa said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Beatrice is right. You have been under so much stress lately with your failing freelance gig and your inability to get pregnant. You are projecting your insecurities onto Julian. Julian is a brilliant, dedicated man who works 80 hours a week at the law firm to provide for you. How dare you sit here and accuse him of something so vile? Calvin. My brother-in-law sat quietly next to Vanessa, looking deeply uncomfortable. Calvin was a senior partner at a prominent accounting firm, a man who lived his entire life by the rules of numbers and spreadsheets. He did not like drama, and he clearly wanted this brunch to end. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and confusion, probably believing his wife's narrative that I was simply a bitter, struggling woman lashing out at her successful husband. I took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs. I reached down to the floor and picked up the sleek leather portfolio I had brought with me. I unzipped the top and pulled out a thick stack of printed documents. The papers were warm from the printer in my home office. I placed them squarely in the center of the table, right next to a basket of warm croissants. "I am not here to argue with you, Beatrice," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I do not need to argue with a woman who has been flying to Tribeca every month to visit her secret grandchildren while pretending to pray for my empty womb at church. My problem today is not with you. My problem today is with my own blood." I shifted my gaze directly to Vanessa, my older sister, the golden child of the Caldwell family, the woman who had spent her entire life collecting praise and accolades while quietly resenting any achievement I ever earned. Vanessa froze as my eyes locked onto hers. The fake sympathy evaporated from her face, replaced by a sudden wary tension. "Let us talk about your nonprofit charity, Vanessa," I said softly, leaning forward. "The Caldwell Foundation for Urban Youth. It is a beautiful initiative. You host galas, you collect donations, and you claim to fund after-school programs for underprivileged children in the metropolitan Atlanta area. It makes you look like an absolute saint in your social circles." Calvin frowned, looking confused. "What does Vanessa's charity have to do with this, Naomi?" he asked, his accounting mind trying to find the logical connection. "Everything, Calvin," I replied, keeping my eyes fixed on my sister. I reached out and slid the top document across the tablecloth until it stopped directly in front of Calvin. It was a detailed bank statement highlighting a series of highly specific recurring wire transfers. Because you see, Calvin Julian is a very busy man. He is a senior associate working 80 hours a week, as Vanessa just pointed out. He does not have the time to personally launder the money he is stealing from his marital assets to fund his mistress in New York. He needed a proxy. He needed someone he could trust completely. He needed someone who hated me enough to help him ruin my life. Calvin looked down at the paper. His eyes scanned the highlighted rows of numbers. As an accountant, it took him less than 10 seconds to read the financial story printed on the page. His face drained of color as the horrific reality of the numbers set in. Every single month on the first day of the month, Julian transfers exactly $15,000 from a hidden offshore account into the primary operating account of Vanessa's charity. I explained, my voice echoing clearly over the table. The deposit is always marked as an anonymous philanthropic donation, but the money does not go to underprivileged children, does it, Vanessa? Exactly 2 days later, $13,500 is wired from the charity account directly to a real estate holding company in New York. A company that conveniently manages the lease for a luxury penthouse in Tribeca, where a woman named Sierra lives with Julian's 2 sons. Calvin stared at his wife, his mouth open in absolute horror. "Vanessa, what is this?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "These are official bank routing numbers. Are you running offshore money through your non-profit?" Vanessa opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked frantically from the paper to Calvin and then to Beatrice, hoping the older woman would save her. But Beatrice was completely silent, staring at the tablecloth in defeated terror. But that is only $13,500. I continued, relentlessly refusing to let my sister off the hook. Julian transfers $15,000 every month. So where does the remaining $1,500 go? I slid a second document across the table. It was a ledger of personal expenditures tied directly to the charity debit card. It goes to your personal shopping habit, Vanessa. You have been taking a 10% laundering fee out of the stolen money every single month. You have been buying designer shoes, luxury handbags, and spa treatments, using the money your brother-in-law steals from your sister to finance his secret family. You were not just a bystander keeping his secret. You were his active financial accomplice. You took a 10% cut out of pure malicious jealousy to keep me in the dark. The silence that engulfed our table was absolute. The background noise of the country club completely faded away. Calvin dropped the papers onto the table as if they had physically burned his fingers. He looked at Vanessa with a level of disgust and betrayal that was painful to witness. He was a licensed, certified public accountant. He knew exactly what he was looking at. He was looking at federal wire fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. He was looking at a felony. And he was looking at his wife as the primary perpetrator. "Vanessa, what have you done?" Calvin whispered, his voice breaking. "You used the foundation for this. You used the charity we built together to help Julian hide his affairs. You committed wire fraud. Do you understand the legal liability you have just brought down on our entire family?" Vanessa's carefully constructed facade of perfection shattered completely. She slammed both of her hands onto the table, her eyes blazing with a sudden manic rage. She did not apologize. She did not beg for forgiveness. Instead, she turned all of her venom directly onto me, her true feelings finally exploding out into the open after decades of suppression. "You never deserved him, Naomi." Vanessa screamed, her voice rising loud enough to turn heads across the dining room. "You never deserved any of it. You were always so arrogant, always walking around acting like you were better than everyone else just because you went to some fancy Ivy League university in New York. You always thought you were smarter than me. You always thought you were special. But you are nothing. You are a cold, emotionless robot who sits at home typing on a computer while your husband starves for real affection." Julian needed a real woman, Naomi. He needed a woman who actually respected him, a woman who understood how to nurture a powerful man. You could not even give him a child. Why should he stay loyal to a barren failure when he could have a real family with someone who actually appreciates him? Her words were meant to destroy me. They were meant to pierce my heart and leave me bleeding on the country club floor. But they only bounced off the armor I had spent the last week building. I looked at my sister, listening to her justify wire fraud and the destruction of my marriage simply because she was jealous of my college degree. She had sold her soul and jeopardized her husband's entire accounting career for a 10% cut of stolen money and the petty satisfaction of watching me fail. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my silk dress. I gathered my leather portfolio and tucked it neatly under my arm. I looked down at the three people sitting at the table. Beatrice looked destroyed. Vanessa looked completely unhinged, breathing heavily as tears of rage streamed down her face. Calvin looked like a man who had just watched his entire life burn to ashes. "Enjoy your brunch, ladies," I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any emotion. "The champagne is lovely today. You should probably order another bottle because the weeks ahead are going to be incredibly difficult for all of you. Julian is going to need a very good lawyer very soon. And since he happens to be a lawyer himself, he should know exactly how much trouble he is currently in." I turned my back on them and walked away. I did not look back as I crossed the dining room, my heels clicking against the polished hardwood floor, leaving my family in a state of absolute devastation and chaos. I left the country club and drove straight back to our estate in Buckhead. The adrenaline from the brunch ambush was still thrumming in my veins. When I pulled into our expansive circular driveway, the first thing I noticed was the sleek black Porsche he parked haphazardly near the front door. He was supposed to be at his law firm preparing for his senior partner announcement. Clearly, his mother and sister had wasted no time making their frantic phone calls. This was the man I had shared a bed with for 7 years. The man who had held my hand during grueling medical procedures while secretly financing a completely separate family in another state. I stepped out of my car and walked up the stone steps to the front entrance, my posture perfectly straight. I pushed the heavy oak door open and stepped into the foyer. The house was dead silent, but the air crackled with heavy, hostile energy. I found him standing silently in our massive gourmet kitchen. Julian was wearing a tailored charcoal suit, his tie loosened just enough to look appropriately distressed. His handsome face, the face that had charmed juries and completely fooled me for nearly a decade, was twisted into a mask of pure, aggressive fury. There was no guilt in his eyes. There was absolutely no remorse for the staggering betrayal I had just uncovered. He did not look like a husband caught in a massive lie. He looked like a predatory lawyer preparing to absolutely destroy a hostile witness on the stand. "My mother called me in tears," Julian began, his voice echoing sharply against the custom subway tile. He did not offer a greeting. He did not ask how I was doing. He went straight for the jugular. "She told me you completely lost your mind at the country club today. She said you started screaming wild accusations about me having another family in New York and accused Vanessa of laundering money. Have you gone entirely insane, Naomi? I know the fertility treatments have been hard on your hormones, but making up psychotic delusions to humiliate my family in front of Atlanta society is unforgivable." I walked casually toward the kitchen island, dropping my keys onto the marble counter. I did not raise my voice. I did not display a single ounce of the crushing heartbreak he expected to see. I simply looked at him. "I am not insane, Julian," I replied, my voice smooth and measured. "And I did not make up anything. I sat next to Sierra on my flight to New York last week. She is quite the talker. She showed me pictures of your 2 sons. She bragged about the Tribeca penthouse you bought for them. And thanks to my own resources, I have the bank statements proving exactly how you funnel $15,000 a month through her fake charity to pay for it all." Julian did not flinch. His legal training kicked in instantly, replacing any lingering panic with cold, calculated arrogance. He reached into his leather briefcase resting on the counter and pulled out a thick stack of stapled legal documents. He slammed them down onto the marble island with a loud, aggressive thud that was meant to make me jump. I barely blinked. "You want to play hardball, Naomi?" he sneered, leaning over the counter to intimidate me with his physical presence. "Fine. Let us play hardball. I was trying to wait until after my senior partner announcement to deal with your instability, but you forced my hand. These are divorce papers. I already signed them. And because I am the top litigator in this state, I am going to explain exactly how this is going to work." I glanced down at the thick stack of papers, then back up at his arrogant face. "Go ahead, Julian," I said slowly, crossing my arms. "Explain it to me." He smiled, a nasty, predatory grin that revealed the true monster lurking beneath his polished exterior. "You are a failed consultant, Naomi. You sit at home playing business owner with your little limited liability company, while I go out and actually build wealth. But because that pathetic little LLC was formed during our marriage, it is considered marital property. I am taking 50% of it. I am taking this house. I am taking both of the luxury cars. I am taking the primary investment accounts. You are going to walk away with exactly what you brought into this marriage, which is absolutely nothing." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "If you try to fight me on this, Naomi, I will completely destroy you. I know every judge in Fulton County. I will bury you in so many legal motions and discovery requests that you will be bleeding money for the next decade. I will drag this divorce out until you cannot even afford to pay rent on a studio apartment. You will be entirely homeless before I ever let you see a single dime of my real money. You think you can outsmart a senior partner at a top-tier law firm. You are completely out of your depth. I listened to his threats, letting his massive ego inflate to the point of absolute delusion. He truly believed I was a struggling freelancer. He had no idea that my little LLC was the parent company of Caldwell Holdings, a billion-dollar crisis management firm that could buy and sell his entire law firm before lunch. He thought he was intimidating a house cat while actively poking a sleeping tiger. Why Julian? I asked, tilting my head slightly. Why go through this elaborate charade? Why string me along for 7 years while building a completely separate life in New York? Julian scoffed, running a hand over his perfectly styled hair. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. Because I needed a wife who actually understood what it meant to represent Black excellence, he said, his words dripping with venom. Look at you, Naomi. You are cold. You are obsessed with your meaningless little projects. You do not know how to support a powerful man. Sierra understands her role. She respects my authority. She stays home and takes care of the children I provide for her. She is a real, true woman, Naomi. A real woman who actually gave me sons to carry on my legacy instead of just giving me empty promises and expensive medical bills. His words were a calculated strike at my deepest insecurities. He was using the very trauma we had supposedly shared, my devastating inability to carry a child to absolute term, to justify his horrific betrayal. He wanted to break me. He wanted to see me crumble onto the kitchen floor and beg for his mercy. Instead, I felt a profound, liberating sense of clarity. The last lingering shred of love I held for this man instantly evaporated, leaving behind nothing but cold, tactical execution. I see, I said, keeping my facial expression completely blank. I reached out and pulled the thick stack of divorce papers toward me. I flipped past the standard boilerplate language, the asset division clauses, and the menacing threats disguised as legal jargon. I knew exactly what I was looking for. A man as arrogant and greedy as Julian would never leave his hidden wealth unprotected during a divorce. He would try to slip a protective clause into the settlement agreement, hoping my supposedly fragile emotional state would cause me to sign it blindly without proper legal counsel. I found it on page 14, Section 8, Paragraph 4. I read the words silently, my mind processing the absolute genius of his monumental stupidity. Julian had drafted a clause designed to completely isolate me from any assets he held outside the state of Georgia. He wanted to ensure I could never touch the Tribeca penthouse or the offshore accounts he used to fund his illicit lifestyle. It explicitly stated that Julian assumed 100% sole ownership and absolute legal liability for any and all offshore financial accounts, out-of-state real estate holdings, and subsidiary shell companies established during the marriage. He thought he was being brilliant. He thought he was tricking a naive blogger into signing away her rights to millions in hidden real estate. He thought this clause was an impenetrable shield protecting his stolen wealth. He did not realize his secret real estate holding company in New York was fraudulently registered under the tax identification number of my corporation. By drafting this specific clause and signing his name to it, Julian had just legally admitted to sole ownership and total liability of a fraudulent shell company. He had just handed me a signed and notarized confession to federal wire fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. He had just handed me the exact murder weapon I needed to completely obliterate his entire pathetic existence. I let the thick stack of papers slip from my fingers. They scattered across the polished marble surface of the kitchen island in a chaotic fan of white pages and dense legal text. I knew that if Julian saw even a flicker of the cold triumph burning behind my eyes, he would immediately realize his catastrophic error. A shark only attacks when it smells blood in the water. I needed to bleed. I needed to give him the performance of a lifetime. I forced my breathing to become shallow and erratic. I blinked rapidly, forcing the moisture to gather in my eyes until hot, heavy tears spilled over my lashes and tracked down my cheeks. My shoulders slumped forward, collapsing under the invisible weight of a devastated, broken wife. My hands began to shake visibly as I reached out to clutch the edge of the cold stone counter. "Julian, please," I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly on the second syllable. "You cannot do this to me. We built this life together. You cannot just take everything and leave me with nothing. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do?" Julian watched my sudden disintegration with a look of absolute euphoric satisfaction. His chest actually puffed out inside his tailored suit. His ego was a massive, starving beast, and my staged despair was an all-you-can-eat buffet. He slowly walked around the kitchen island, stalking toward me like a predator circling wounded prey. "You should have thought about that before you decided to humiliate my mother and sister at the country club, Naomi," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You thought you could play games with my family. You thought you were so incredibly clever. But you are not playing with a bunch of desperate housewives anymore. You are dealing with a senior partner at one of the most ruthless law firms in the country. I destroy people for a living. I dismantle corporations before I have my morning coffee. Did you honestly think you could win a fight against me?" I let out a ragged sob, covering my face with my hands. I peered at him through the gaps in my fingers, watching his arrogance blind him to the reality of the situation. "But Julian, the offshore accounts," I sobbed, letting my voice pitch higher in feigned panic. "I know you have money hidden. I saw the bank statements. Vanessa helped you move it. You cannot just write a clause saying you take sole ownership of all that money. That is not fair. It is marital property. Half of that is mine." Julian threw his head back and laughed. It was a cruel, booming sound that echoed off the high ceilings of our custom kitchen. He stepped so close to me that I could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the bitter scent of his unyielding pride. "Fair," he mocked, leaning down until his face was inches from mine. "Let me explain something to you about fairness, Naomi. Fair is a concept for losers. Fair is an excuse invented by weak people who do not have the intelligence to take what they want. I earned every single dollar in those accounts. I worked 80-hour weeks. I schmoozed clients. I built my empire while you sat at home playing around on your little laptop with your pathetic freelance blog. You contributed absolutely nothing of real value to this marriage. Why should you get to keep my money?" I shook my head violently, letting my tears fall freely onto the marble counter. "Because we are married," I pleaded, my voice trembling. "Because we promised to share everything. You cannot just sign a paper and claim all the out-of-state real estate is exclusively yours. I will fight you. I will hire a lawyer and I will fight for my share of the Tribeca penthouse." Julian's eyes narrowed into dark, dangerous slits. He reached out and grabbed my chin, forcing me to look directly into his cold, empty eyes. He wanted me to feel small. He wanted me to feel entirely powerless. "You will not fight me, Naomi," he whispered, his tone laced with absolute menace. "Because if you even try to hire a lawyer, I will drown you in litigation. I will tie you up in so many motions and discovery requests that your legal fees will bankrupt you within a month. I will freeze your access to every single checking account and credit card we share. I will drag you through the mud in open court. I will expose your mental instability. I will make sure every judge in this state views you as a bitter, hysterical woman trying to extort her highly respected husband. You will be entirely homeless, living on the streets before I ever let you touch a single dime of my wealth." I let out a soft, pathetic whimper, exactly the sound a defeated animal makes when it realizes there is no escape. Julian smiled, relishing the sound. He released my chin and stepped back, smoothing his tie. Sierra understands this. He continued, his tone shifting to a sickeningly sweet sort of praise. Sierra respects my authority. She does not challenge me. She does not demand things she did not earn. She is a real woman, Naomi. She understands black excellence. She understands that a king needs a queen who supports him, not a parasite who drains him. She gave me 2 beautiful, healthy sons. She gave me the legacy you were too biologically deficient to provide. You were always so arrogant, acting like you were better than us, just because you went to an Ivy League school. But look at you now. You are nothing. I wrapped my arms around my stomach, bending forward, as if his words had physically gutted me. The cruelty of his insults would have broken the old Naomi. But the new Naomi, the CEO, who had already frozen his hidden assets and audited his entire existence, simply logged his insults as collateral damage in a corporate war. I just needed him to seal the deal. I needed the signature. Please, Julian, I begged, my voice barely a whisper. Please just leave me the house. If I sign these papers giving you all the offshore accounts and the New York property, will you just let me keep the house in Buckhead? I have nowhere else to go. Julian looked around the massive kitchen, sneering at the imported fixtures and custom cabinetry. I do not want this house, he said dismissively. It reminds me too much of you. Keep it. Consider it a parting gift for 7 years of wasted time. But you are going to sign these papers exactly as I drafted them. You are going to sign over all rights to the offshore accounts and the real estate subsidiaries. You are going to walk away quietly and let me live my life. He reached into the breast pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a heavy gold fountain pen. He clicked the cap off and practically slammed the pen onto the marble counter right next to the signature page of the divorce agreement. He pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the dotted line. Sign it, Naomi, he commanded, his voice echoing with absolute authority. It is over. You lose. I stared at the gold pen. I let my hand shake violently as I slowly reached out and picked it up. The metal felt heavy and cold against my skin. I looked up at Julian, my eyes swimming with fake tears, offering him one last look of utter devastation. He smirked, crossing his arms over his chest. Sign it, he repeated. I lowered my eyes to the document. I focused on the specific clause he had drafted with such arrogant precision. The clause where Julian explicitly claimed 100% sole ownership and absolute legal liability for all out-of-state real estate holdings and offshore accounts established during our marriage. He thought he was protecting his stolen wealth. He had absolutely no idea that he was legally claiming ownership of a massive federal crime. I pressed the pen down and signed the pages quickly. Julian immediately snatched them up, feeling totally victorious. He packed his briefcase and walked out, dialing Sierra to brag about his massive win. The moment the heavy front door shut, my tears dried completely. I calmly wiped my face and walked to my office. I scanned my hidden copy of the signed document and emailed it to Desmond. Then I picked up my phone. Desmond, he just signed a legally binding admission that those accounts belong exclusively to him. Send the tip to the FBI. Let us see how his prestigious law firm handles a federal wire fraud investigation. They will most likely fire him before sunset, I added. We are going to absolutely burn his entire arrogant empire directly to the ground today, Desmond agreed eagerly. Monday morning arrived with pristine clarity. The humid air of Atlanta had been replaced by the climate-controlled perfection of my corporate sanctuary. I stepped out of my private elevator and walked onto the top floor of the Caldwell Holdings Tower. The sleek, glass-walled corridor stretched out before me, offering a panoramic view of the bustling city skyline. I was no longer the quiet, supportive freelance wife who smiled politely at dull, firm dinners and endured the condescending remarks of a narcissistic husband and his toxic family. I was the architect of my own empire, and today I was stepping onto the corporate battlefield to claim my ultimate prize. My designer heels clicked against the polished Italian marble floors with measured authoritative rhythm. The executive receptionist stood up immediately as I passed her desk, offering a sharp professional nod of profound respect. I bypassed my sprawling corner office entirely and walked straight toward the main executive boardroom. The heavy frosted glass doors slid open automatically, revealing the absolute nerve center of my global financial operations. Desmond was already sitting at the head of the massive custom mahogany table, surrounded by our top-tier financial analysts and senior acquisition strategists. Large digital monitors lined the walls, displaying glowing financial charts, complex stock trajectories, and the rapidly declining debt profiles of our current acquisition targets. The expansive room smelled faintly of dark roast espresso and aggressive corporate ambition. "Good morning, Naomi," Desmond said, rising from his leather chair the moment I entered the room. He handed me a thick black folder stamped with a highly confidential red seal. "The team has been working tirelessly through the entire weekend. The financial trap is completely set and ready for deployment." I took my seat at the center of the table, placing the heavy folder down directly in front of me. I opened it and scanned the top sheet of the detailed executive summary. For the past 8 months, long before I ever saw that photograph on the airplane, my team had been quietly and methodically buying up the toxic debt of Sterling and Vance. Julian's elite law firm projected an image of absolute financial invincibility to the general public. They threw lavish parties, drove imported sports cars, and boasted relentlessly about their massive legal settlements. But behind closed mahogany doors, they were bleeding cash at a catastrophic rate. Their senior partners had grown arrogant and lazy, mismanaging client funds and making disastrous commercial real estate investments that had tanked. They were carrying over $40 million in unsecured debt, and their primary lenders were preparing to call in the loans. If that happened, the firm would face bankruptcy and the irreversible dissolution of their legacy. "We currently hold 65% of their outstanding corporate debt," Desmond explained, gesturing toward the presentation screen. "Through our various shell companies, we have acquired their massive liabilities from 3 separate banking institutions. They are completely tapped out, Naomi. Their operational credit lines are permanently frozen. They cannot even make payroll by the end of this month without an injection of liquid capital. Caldwell Holdings is the only financial entity with the liquidity and motive to throw them a lifeline." I nodded slowly, tracing my finger over the names of the senior partners listed in the file. Julian's name was printed near the bottom, explicitly slated for his upcoming promotion. He had spent 7 exhausting years brown-nosing these older men desperate to join their prestigious ranks. He thought becoming a senior partner would cement his status as an absolute king of Atlanta high society. He did not know he was blindly fighting for a premium seat on a rapidly sinking ship. "Have they reviewed our terms?" I asked, looking up at my lead strategist. "They certainly have," the strategist replied, adjusting his glasses with a knowing smirk. "And they are absolutely terrified by the implications. They know a hostile corporate takeover is their only viable alternative to complete liquidation." The managing partner, Richard Vance, is anxiously waiting in the reception area right now. He is incredibly desperate. He flew back early from his vacation house in Aspen, specifically to beg on his knees for our capital. "Bring him in," I commanded, leaning back comfortably in my plush leather chair. A minute later, the frosted glass doors slid open and Richard Vance walked nervously into the boardroom. He was a distinguished man in his late 60s, who usually projected the effortless, powerful aura of old Southern money and unshakable legal prestige. Today, however, his tailored suit looked slightly rumpled, and his pale face was drawn with deep, haggard lines of overwhelming stress. He had built his firm over 40 grueling years, and the sheer horrifying prospect of losing it to humiliating bankruptcy had clearly shattered his fundamental confidence. He stopped abruptly at the edge of the large table, looking intensely at Desmond, and then slowly turning his bewildered gaze toward me. He blinked multiple times in pure, unfiltered surprise. He recognized me, of course. He had seen me at dozens of lavish firm holiday parties, playing the quiet, dutiful, smiling wife to his rising star associate, Julian. He knew me only as Naomi, the struggling freelance blog writer. The stunning realization that I was the unseen billionaire CEO poised to buy his firm out from under him hit him with the devastating force of a physical blow. "Naomi," he stammered, his flawless professional composure slipping entirely. "What on earth are you doing here in this room? Are you representing Julian in some unofficial capacity?" I offered him a cold, razor-sharp smile that contained absolutely no warmth. "Please take a seat, Richard," I instructed, gesturing to the empty chair. "And no, I am absolutely not representing my unfaithful husband. I am representing myself exclusively. I am the sole visionary founder and primary majority shareholder of Caldwell Holdings, the powerful firm that currently holds the absolute legal deed to your entire professional existence." Richard sank heavily into the nearest chair, staring at me in absolute paralyzed shock. "You own the holding company," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the servers. "But Julian always said you were just running a very small, failing internet project from home." "Julian says a lot of incredibly stupid things, Richard," I replied smoothly, resting my hands deliberately on the table. "Most of them are pathetic lies. But we are not here today to discuss the tragic state of my marriage. We are here to discuss the tragic state of your firm. You are drowning in $40 million of toxic debt. Your senior partners have mismanaged the operational budget to the point of severe criminal negligence. You are exactly 3 weeks away from total insolvency." Richard swallowed hard, sweat beading visibly on his wrinkled forehead. "We have had a few difficult financial quarters," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly under the immense pressure. "But we still have a very solid, dependable client base. We just desperately need a substantial bridge loan to stabilize our critical cash flow until the start of the next fiscal year." "There will absolutely be no bridge loan," I stated firmly, completely cutting off his pathetic, desperate attempt at negotiation. "I am not a charitable organization, Richard. I am an apex corporate predator, and right now your prestigious firm is bleeding out helplessly in my designated territory. I will personally clear your entire $40 million debt today. I will securely inject an additional $10 million directly into your operating accounts to cover upcoming payroll and fully stabilize your pending litigation costs." Richard's eyes widened with desperate hope. "You would do that?" he asked. "What are your demanding terms?" "My terms are non-negotiable," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady register that commanded terrified silence. "I will take a permanent 60% majority ownership stake in Sterling and Vance. I will possess absolute veto power over all board decisions. Your firm will become a direct subsidiary of Caldwell Holdings. But that effectively means you would control absolutely everything," Richard protested. "I already own the firm, Richard," I corrected him sharply. "I hold the debt. I could force you into liquidation right now and sell off your assets for scraps. This deal is the only way you get to keep your name on the door." He looked around the boardroom, seeing the cold expressions of my financial team. He knew he had absolutely zero leverage. "I will formally accept your terms, Naomi," he said quietly. "There is one final condition," I added. Complete anonymity until the night of the partner announcement gala. The current managing partner, desperate to save his firm, agreed to hand over the company to me. "Who do you want us to fire first?" "Ms. Caldwell," he asked. I shook my head. "No one," I replied softly. "I want Julian to get his promotion. Put him on the highest pedestal possible before I kick it out from under him." Exactly 2 weeks later, the sprawling glass atrium of the Vanguard Contemporary Art Gallery in downtown Atlanta was completely transformed into a breathtaking monument to corporate vanity. The annual partner announcement gala for Sterling and Vance was legendary within the city's legal and financial circles. It was a night designed exclusively for the ultra-wealthy to drink vintage champagne, secure lucrative backdoor deals, and ruthlessly measure each other's net worth. Massive floral arrangements of white orchids and silver branches towered over the crystal service stations. A string quartet played softly from a raised velvet platform, while servers in crisp black uniforms circulated through the crowd, offering caviar and perfectly seared Wagyu appetizers. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and unyielding ambition. At the absolute center of this opulent circus stood Julian. He had spared absolutely no expense for his coronation. He wore a custom-tailored midnight blue tuxedo with black silk lapels that fit his broad shoulders flawlessly. His posture was rigid with practiced superiority, and his charismatic smile was locked firmly in place as he accepted a continuous stream of handshakes and flattering congratulations from the city's legal elite. He looked exactly like a king holding court in his personal kingdom, entirely oblivious to the massive invisible guillotine hanging directly over his head. But Julian was not standing alone to receive his manufactured glory. Clinging tightly to his arm, wearing an impossibly sheer, diamond-encrusted gown that plunged dangerously low in the back, was Sierra. She had flown down from New York specifically for the occasion, leaving their 2 secret sons with a high-priced Manhattan nanny. The diamonds glittering at her throat and dripping from her earlobes caught the ambient light, throwing tiny fractured rainbows across the gallery walls. I knew exactly how much that jewelry cost because my financial team had audited the fraudulent wire transfers that paid for it. Every single gemstone she flaunted was purchased with money stolen from my marital assets and laundered through my own corporate tax identification number. Sierra looked utterly triumphant. She had finally stepped out of the shadows of Tribeca to claim her prize publicly. And validating her ascension were the 2 women who had orchestrated my prolonged humiliation. Beatrice and Vanessa flanked the happy couple, completing the toxic family portrait. Beatrice wore an elegant silver gown, her face glowing with genuine matriarchal pride as she reached out to pat Sierra's hand. Vanessa stood on Sierra's other side, laughing loudly at a joke Julian made and holding her champagne flute high. They were fawning over the mistress, posing for professional society photographers and openly introducing her to the wives of other senior partners. They were publicly replacing me without a single ounce of shame, cementing their vicious loyalty to Julian and the immense wealth they blindly believed he possessed. It was a staggering display of coordinated cruelty meant to permanently erase my 7 years of devotion. While they were busy celebrating their stolen victories, I was sitting quietly in the back of a chauffeured Maybach, gliding smoothly through the heavy evening traffic toward the gallery. I was no longer the quiet, supportive freelance wife who wore modest, conservative dresses to blend into the background of Julian's aggressively spotlighted life. That version of Naomi Caldwell was officially dead and buried. Tonight, I was stepping out of the shadows as the ruthless apex predator of Atlanta corporate finance. The billionaire CEO of Caldwell Holdings was finally making her public debut. I had commissioned a custom gown specifically for this evening. It was a breathtaking architectural masterpiece constructed from deep emerald silk that moved like liquid glass. The bodice was structured and sharp, projecting unapologetic armor, while the skirt flowed down into a dramatic sweeping train that commanded absolute space. My hair was styled in a sleek, severe bun, pulling my features tight and drawing immediate attention to my eyes, which were lined in dark, predatory onyx. I wore no necklace. I did not need diamonds purchased with stolen funds to broadcast my power. The only jewelry I wore was a vintage emerald cocktail ring on my right index finger, a quiet nod to the monumental wealth I possessed independently. Desmond sat across from me in the luxury vehicle, reviewing the final execution timeline on his encrypted tablet. The managing partner, Richard Vance, signed the absolute final transfer documents an hour ago. Desmond reported, his voice vibrating with barely contained excitement. The massive capital injection has cleared their primary operating accounts. Sterling and Vance is now officially a direct subsidiary of Caldwell Holdings. You possess 60% majority ownership and total unchecked voting control over their entire executive board. They belong to you, Naomi. Everything inside that building tonight is your personal property. I nodded slowly, looking out the tinted window at the glowing facade of the art gallery approaching in the distance. The timing is absolutely perfect, I murmured. Let them enjoy the champagne. Let them take the photographs. I want Julian to feel the absolute pinnacle of his success before the ground opens up and swallows him whole. The Maybach pulled smoothly to a halt in front of the gallery's sweeping glass entrance. The valet rushed forward, opening the heavy door. I stepped out onto the red carpet, the cool evening air catching the emerald silk of my train. A hush fell over the immediate crowd gathered near the velvet ropes. I did not pause to acknowledge the curious stares. I walked directly past the aggressive security checkpoint. When the head bouncer stepped forward to request an invitation, Desmond simply flashed a platinum credential card bearing the Vanguard Gallery's primary ownership seal. The bouncer instantly stepped back, lowering his head in a gesture of absolute submission. I walked through the frosted glass doors and stepped into the main atrium. The transition was cinematic. As I moved into the brightly lit room, the murmuring conversations closest to the entrance abruptly stopped. Heads began to turn. Wives of senior partners, men who had ignored me at tedious dinners, and junior associates who had pitied my impending divorce, all stopped mid-sentence. The sheer dominating aura of my entrance demanded absolute attention. The crowd naturally parted, forming a wide, clear path as I walked purposefully toward the center of the room. The clicking of my heels against the marble floor sounded like a ticking clock marking the final seconds of Julian's reign. I glided through the sea of expensive tuxedos and designer gowns, keeping my posture flawlessly rigid and my gaze fixed straight ahead. I did not look at the floral arrangements or the intricate modern art sculptures hanging on the expansive white walls. I was solely focused on the group standing near the elevated velvet stage at the far end of the room. Julian was holding a fresh glass of champagne, smiling broadly, as Richard Vance, the man who had just secretly sold his entire firm to me, approached the microphone to begin the partner announcements. Then Julian turned his head. His eyes swept casually across the parted crowd and instantly locked onto me. The smug, victorious smile slid off his face so fast it was almost comical. It was replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock, followed rapidly by a surge of aggressive, furious panic. He blinked rapidly as if trying to clear a hallucination from his vision. He could not comprehend how the broken, weeping woman he had cornered in our kitchen just a few weeks ago was currently standing in the center of his exclusive corporate gala, looking like a conquering monarch. Beside him, Sierra noticed his sudden rigid posture and followed his line of sight. Her hand flew to her diamond-covered throat as she recognized me from our encounter on the airplane. Beatrice and Vanessa turned next, their faces contorting into identical masks of horrified outrage. They had assumed I was sitting in some cheap apartment crying over my ruined life while they paraded Julian's new mistress around town. Julian did not hesitate. His massive ego propelled him forward. He slammed his champagne glass onto a passing tray and marched aggressively across the marble floor, signaling frantically to two large security guards stationed near the catering exit. The guards flanked him immediately, looking intimidating in their dark suits. Julian reached me, stopping just inches away, attempting to use his physical size to completely overshadow me. His face was flushed red with absolute volcanic rage. I looked up into his deeply flushed face and felt absolutely nothing but profound pity. He sneered down at me, entirely convinced that he still possessed the ultimate upper hand in this situation. His profound arrogance had completely blinded him to the undeniable reality standing directly in front of his very eyes. He was a foolish little man playing a very dangerous game he could never ever win. "I told you, you are done, Naomi," he hissed, his voice vibrating with malicious fury. "You are trespassing. Throw her out." The two massive security guards in dark suits stepped forward, but they did not reach for my arms. They did not grab my shoulders or attempt to physically escort me out of the opulent gallery. Instead, they seamlessly flanked me, standing at rigid attention facing Julian. One of them shifted his weight, placing himself directly between my ex-husband and my custom emerald gown. Julian blinked, his handsome face registering a fleeting moment of pure, utter confusion. He looked from the guards to me, and then back to the guards, his flawless, arrogant composure finally showing a tiny, visible crack. "Did you not hear me?" Julian snapped, his voice rising in volume and drawing the attention of several nearby wealthy investors. "I am a senior partner at this firm. I am giving you a direct order to remove this woman from the premises immediately." The guards remained completely statuesque. They stared straight ahead, treating Julian as if he were nothing more than a minor annoyance buzzing around their actual employer. The silence stretching between us was absolute poison to Julian's massive ego. He was a man who commanded courtrooms, who barked orders, and expected immediate, absolute, total compliance almost always. "I will have both of your jobs," Julian threatened, taking a step closer and jabbing his finger toward the taller guard. "You work for Vanguard Gallery, and Vanguard works for my firm tonight. I am calling your supervisor right now." "You do not need to call anyone, Julian," I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any emotional inflection. "They are not Vanguard security. They are my personal corporate security detail. Desmond positioned them at the catering exit an hour ago, specifically to intercept any unwanted hostility." "Julian, you are making an absolute complete fool of yourself right now." Julian scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound of pure disbelief. "You cannot afford private corporate security, Naomi. You cannot even afford that dress you are wearing. I do not know whose credit card you maxed out to play this pathetic little game, but it ends right now." He reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out his phone, his thumb aggressively stabbing at the screen. "I am calling Richard Vance. He will have real police officers here in 5 minutes to arrest you for criminal trespassing." "You will not need to call Richard," I replied smoothly, pointing my right index finger. "He is already on his way over here." Julian turned his head sharply. Richard Vance, the esteemed managing partner of Sterling, and Vance was currently pushing his way through the sea of elegant guests. Richard was not walking with his usual slow, dignified gait. He was practically sprinting, his face flushed a deep mottled red and a thick sheen of sweat coating his wrinkled forehead. He carried a wireless microphone in his right hand, gripping it so tightly his knuckles were stark white. He looked completely terrified as he dodged confused servers and bumped into the very wealthy elite patrons. Julian saw Richard approaching and immediately adopted a posture of aggrieved authority. He straightened his tuxedo jacket and plastered on a look of professional indignation. "Richard, I am incredibly sorry for this disruption," Julian said loudly, ensuring the surrounding crowd could hear him taking control of the situation. "My soon-to-be ex-wife is having a severe mental health crisis. She managed to sneak past the front door staff and is now refusing to leave. I ordered these guards to remove her, but they are completely incompetent. Please have gallery management call the police immediately for us right now. We can handle this quietly and get back to the partner announcements." Richard did not look at the guards. He did not look at the crowd. He stopped completely short, staring at Julian with an expression of profound, devastating pity. It was the kind of look a doctor gives a terminal patient right before delivering the fatal diagnosis. The managing partner was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his expensive tuxedo shirt. "Richard, what is the holdup?" Julian pressed his tone, edging toward disrespect. "Just give the order. Have her thrown out right now. We are wasting our precious time." Richard slowly shook his head. The older man looked physically sick. He wiped a trembling hand across his sweaty brow and took a deep breath. "Julian," he started, his voice cracking slightly. "Julian, you do not understand." Understand what Julian demanded, his impatience fully masking his ability to read the terrifying reality unfolding right in front of him. "She is a hysterical woman trying to ruin my night. What is there to understand? Just get rid of her." Richard swallowed hard, looking directly into Julian's angry, confused eyes. He lifted his own trembling hand and slowly gestured weakly toward me. "Julian, you do not understand." Richard repeated the words, carrying a terrifying heavy weight. "She owns the building. She owns the firm." The words hung in the air, suspended in the sudden absolute silence of the room. The string quartet had stopped playing. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes had ceased entirely. The entire gallery, full of Atlanta's elite power brokers, stood completely frozen, watching the spectacular destruction of Julian Sterling. Julian stared at his boss. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. His brilliant and aggressive legal mind simply short-circuited, completely unable to process basic reality. He could not process the information. It defied every single arrogant assumption he had ever made about me, about our marriage, and about his own magnificent superiority. "Owns the firm." Julian repeated the words slowly, as if trying out a foreign language for the very first time. "Richard, what are you talking about? She is a freelance blogger. She works from home. You are not making any sense." Richard stepped aside, completely removing himself from the line of fire. He looked at me with an expression of total submission and gently held out the wireless black microphone toward me now. "We sold the debt," Julian Richard said quietly, staring at the marble floor. "Sterling and Vance was insolvent. We had no choice. Caldwell Holdings bought 60% of the shares an hour ago. She is the CEO. She is your boss." I watched the exact moment Julian's reality shattered. The blood drained completely from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of pale gray. His eyes darted wildly around the room, looking for anyone to contradict this impossible nightmare. For 7 years, he had treated me like an insignificant accessory, mocking my career and dismissing my basic human intelligence daily. Now he was staring at the billionaire titan who held his entire professional existence in the palm of her hand. But Julian was not the only one experiencing a catastrophic system failure. I shifted my gaze slightly to the right. Sierra, Beatrice, and Vanessa were standing completely frozen just a few feet away. The smug, triumphant smiles they had worn all evening had melted into identical masks of absolute terror. Sierra looked as though she might actually faint. Her hands clutched the sheer fabric of her diamond-encrusted gown, her eyes wide with mounting panic and raw, visceral, deep fear. She had flown to Atlanta, believing she was cementing her status as the new queen of Julian's wealthy empire. She thought she was replacing a pathetic penniless housewife. Hearing the managing partner of the law firm declare that I owned the very ground they were standing on fundamentally destroyed her entire calculated reality. Beatrice Sterling looked physically ill. The proud, manipulative matriarch, who had spent the entire afternoon gaslighting me at the country club, was now staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated dread. She grasped Vanessa's arm for support, her manicured fingers digging incredibly painfully deeply inside. Vanessa was completely speechless. The jealous, bitter sister who had gladly laundered stolen funds to finance my husband's affair simply because she hated my Ivy League degree was currently calculating the exact severity of her own federal crimes. She knew I had the bank statements, and looking at my cold, unforgiving expression, she finally realized that I was not going to show her a single ounce of familial mercy. The total, absolute devastation of the people who had conspired to ruin my life was deeply, profoundly satisfying. It was a master class in swift, brutal corporate justice and total legal execution. I reached out and accepted the microphone from Richard's trembling hand. The heavy metal felt perfect in my grasp. I turned my back on Julian, dismissing him, and walked with authoritative steps toward the elevated velvet platform at the center of the room. The crowd parted, giving me a wide, clear path. I stood at the center of the platform, looking out over the sea of guests. I tapped the microphone, the feedback echoing through the silent hall. Good evening, everyone. As the new majority owner of this firm, I have a few adjustments to make to tonight's partner promotions. The two massive security guards in dark suits stepped forward, but they did not reach for my arms. They did not grab my shoulders or attempt to physically escort me out of the opulent gallery. Instead, they seamlessly flanked me, standing at rigid attention facing Julian. One of them shifted his weight, placing himself directly between my ex-husband and my custom emerald gown. Julian blinked his handsome face, registering a fleeting moment of pure, utter confusion. He looked from the guards to me, and then back to the guards, his flawless, arrogant composure finally showing a tiny, visible crack. "Did you not hear me?" Julian snapped, his voice rising in volume and drawing the attention of several nearby wealthy investors. "I am a senior partner at this firm. I am giving you a direct order to remove this woman from the premises immediately." The guards remained completely statuesque. They stared straight ahead, treating Julian as if he were nothing more than a minor annoyance buzzing around their actual employer. The silence stretching between us was absolute poison to Julian's massive ego. He was a man who commanded courtrooms, who barked orders and expected immediate, absolute, total compliance almost always. "I will have both of your jobs," Julian threatened, taking a step closer and jabbing his finger toward the taller guard. "You work for Vanguard Gallery, and Vanguard works for my firm tonight. I am calling your supervisor right now." "You do not need to call anyone, Julian," I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any emotional inflection. "They are not Vanguard security. They are my personal corporate security detail. Desmond positioned them at the catering exit an hour ago specifically to intercept any unwanted hostility. Julian, you are making an absolute complete fool of yourself right now." Julian scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound of pure disbelief. "You cannot afford private corporate security, Naomi. You cannot even afford that dress you are wearing. I do not know whose credit card you maxed out to play this pathetic little game, but it ends right now." He reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out his phone, his thumb aggressively stabbing at the screen. "I am calling Richard Vance. He will have real police officers here in 5 minutes to arrest you for criminal trespassing." "You will not need to call Richard," I replied smoothly, pointing my right index finger. "He is already on his way over here." Julian turned his head sharply. Richard Vance, the esteemed managing partner of Sterling and Vance, was currently pushing his way through the sea of elegant guests. Richard was not walking with his usual slow, dignified gait. He was practically sprinting, his face flushed a deep mottled red and a thick sheen of sweat coating his wrinkled forehead. He carried a wireless microphone in his right hand, gripping it so tightly his knuckles were stark white. He looked completely terrified as he dodged confused servers and bumped into the very wealthy elite patrons. Julian saw Richard approaching and immediately adopted a posture of aggrieved authority. He straightened his tuxedo jacket and plastered on a look of professional indignation. "Richard, I am incredibly sorry for this disruption," Julian said loudly, ensuring the surrounding crowd could hear him taking control of the situation. "My soon-to-be ex-wife is having a severe mental health crisis. She managed to sneak past the front door staff and is now refusing to leave. I ordered these guards to remove her, but they are completely incompetent. Please have gallery management call the police immediately for us right now. We can handle this quietly and get back to the partner announcements." Richard did not look at the guards. He did not look at the crowd. He stopped completely short, staring at Julian with an expression of profound, devastating pity. It was the kind of look a doctor gives a terminal patient right before delivering the fatal diagnosis. The managing partner was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his expensive tuxedo shirt. "Richard, what is the holdup?" Julian pressed his tone, edging toward disrespect. "Just give the order. Have her thrown out right now. We are wasting our precious time." Richard slowly shook his head. The older man looked physically sick. He wiped a trembling hand across his sweaty brow and took a deep breath. "Julian," he started, his voice cracking slightly. "Julian, you do not understand." Understand what Julian demanded, his impatience fully masking his ability to read the terrifying reality unfolding right in front of him. "She is a hysterical woman trying to ruin my night. What is there to understand? Just get rid of her." Richard swallowed hard, looking directly into Julian's angry, confused eyes. He lifted his own trembling hand and slowly gestured weakly toward me. "Julian, you do not understand." Richard repeated the words, carrying a terrifying heavy weight. "She owns the building. She owns the firm." The words hung in the air, suspended in the sudden absolute silence of the room. The string quartet had stopped playing. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes had ceased entirely. The entire gallery, full of Atlanta's elite power brokers, stood completely frozen, watching the spectacular destruction of Julian Sterling. Julian stared at his boss. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. His brilliant and aggressive legal mind simply short-circuited, completely unable to process basic reality. He could not process the information. It defied every single arrogant assumption he had ever made about me, about our marriage, and about his own magnificent superiority. "Owns the firm." Julian repeated the words slowly, as if trying out a foreign language for the very first time. "Richard, what are you talking about? She is a freelance blogger. She works from home. You are not making any sense." Richard stepped aside, completely removing himself from the line of fire. He looked at me with an expression of total submission and gently held out the wireless black microphone toward me now. "We sold the debt," Julian, Richard said quietly, staring at the marble floor. "Sterling and Vance was insolvent. We had no choice. Caldwell Holdings bought 60% of the shares an hour ago. She is the CEO. She is your boss." I watched the exact moment Julian's reality shattered. The blood drained completely from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of pale gray. His eyes darted wildly around the room, looking for anyone to contradict this impossible nightmare. For 7 years, he had treated me like an insignificant accessory, mocking my career and dismissing my basic human intelligence daily. Now he was staring at the billionaire titan who held his entire professional existence in the palm of her hand. But Julian was not the only one experiencing a catastrophic system failure. I shifted my gaze slightly to the right. Sierra, Beatrice, and Vanessa were standing completely frozen just a few feet away. The smug, triumphant smiles they had worn all evening had melted into identical masks of absolute terror. Sierra looked as though she might actually faint. Her hands clutched the sheer fabric of her diamond-encrusted gown, her eyes wide with mounting panic and raw, visceral, deep fear. She had flown to Atlanta believing she was cementing her status as the new queen of Julian's wealthy empire. She thought she was replacing a pathetic, penniless housewife. Hearing the managing partner of the law firm declare that I owned the very ground they were standing on fundamentally destroyed her entire calculated reality. Beatrice Sterling looked physically ill. The proud, manipulative matriarch who had spent the entire afternoon gaslighting me at the country club was now staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated dread. She grasped Vanessa's arm for support, her manicured fingers digging incredibly painfully deeply inside. Vanessa was completely speechless. The jealous, bitter sister who had gladly laundered stolen funds to finance my husband's affair, simply because she hated my Ivy League degree, was currently calculating the exact severity of her own federal crimes. She knew I had the bank statements, and looking at my cold, unforgiving expression, she finally realized that I was not going to show her a single ounce of familial mercy. The total, absolute devastation of the people who had conspired to ruin my life was deeply, profoundly satisfying. It was a masterclass in swift, brutal corporate justice and total legal execution. I reached out and accepted the microphone from Richard's trembling hand. The heavy metal felt perfect in my grasp. I turned my back on Julian, dismissing him, and walked with authoritative steps toward the elevated velvet platform at the center of the room. The crowd parted, giving me a wide, clear path. I stood at the center of the platform, looking out over the sea of guests. I tapped the microphone, the feedback echoing through the silent hall. Good evening, everyone. As the new majority owner of this firm, I have a few adjustments to make to tonight's partner promotions. I held the microphone loosely, letting the heavy silence stretch for another agonizing second. The faces of the city's most powerful individuals stared back at me, their expressions shifting rapidly from mild annoyance to sheer captivated horror. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached into my emerald silk clutch and retrieved a small remote control, pressing a single silver button. The massive digital projector screen mounted directly behind the velvet platform instantly flared to life. Gasps echoed throughout the gallery as highly classified internal documents suddenly illuminated the room in stark high definition. I had instructed my cyber forensics team to pull the exact internal client escrow ledgers of Sterling and Vance and place them directly beside Julian's personal offshore bank records. The math was not just damning, it was catastrophically undeniable. Julian Sterling is an incredibly brilliant lawyer, I announced, my voice echoing cleanly through the state-of-the-art sound system. He is so brilliantly calculated, in fact, that over the last 5 years, he has successfully embezzled $3.5 million directly from your client escrow funds. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the front row of wealthy investors. He stole your money specifically to finance a secret second family hidden away in a luxury penthouse in New York. Julian scrambled forward, his face contorted in absolute panic. That is a lie, he screamed, his voice cracking wildly as he pointed a shaking finger at the screen. It is a complete fabrication. She hacked our system and altered the numbers. It is a total setup. I smiled, a cold, razor-sharp expression that contained absolutely zero mercy. I pressed the silver button again. The screen instantly shifted, replacing the bank ledgers with the divorce documents Julian had shoved across our kitchen table. This is a legally binding document drafted by Julian himself, I stated clearly. In this settlement, he aggressively claimed 100% sole ownership of the exact offshore accounts where your stolen money currently sits. You did not just cheat on your wife, Julian. You left a perfect, undeniable paper trail for a federal felony. The elite crowd instantly erupted into absolute, pure, unadulterated outrage. Men and women who had just been toasting his success began shouting furiously, demanding immediate answers. A prominent real estate developer in the front row slammed his crystal champagne flute onto the marble floor, shattering it. "You stole from my company!" The developer roared, lunging toward the stage before the Vanguard security guards intervened. Panic spread like a vicious wildfire through the opulent hall as the wealthiest people in Atlanta suddenly realized their personal fortunes had been systematically drained to fund the lavish lifestyle of a narcissistic fraud. Richard Vance, completely overwhelmed by the explosive fury of his most important clients, buried his face in his trembling hands. The prestigious law firm he had built over 40 grueling years was dissolving into complete ash right before his terrified eyes, all because of his extreme blind arrogance. I watched the chaos unfold with a deep, profound sense of calm satisfaction. The social hierarchy of Atlanta was being aggressively, violently realigned. Julian stumbled backward, his arrogant facade completely annihilated. He looked like a cornered rat frantically scanning the angry mob for a sympathetic face, but finding only sheer, absolute venom. I turned my attention away from my ruined ex-husband and focused my cold gaze on the woman shivering beside him. Sierra was standing perfectly still, her flawless complexion draining to a sickly, translucent white. The sheer diamond-encrusted gown she wore suddenly looked incredibly heavy and absurdly pathetic. I stepped slightly closer to the edge of the velvet stage, keeping the microphone raised. "By the way, Sierra," I casually mentioned, my voice cutting smoothly through the aggressive shouting of the crowd. "That magnificent Tribeca penthouse you currently live in. It is officially owned by Caldwell Holdings. I acquired the primary deed to that specific property 3 days ago. Your formal eviction notice is physically taped to your front door as we speak. You have absolutely no legal right to reside in that building anymore. Your entire luxurious lifestyle was built entirely on a foundation of stolen cash." Sierra gasped, taking a stumbling step backward as her manicured hands flew to her mouth. The blood drained entirely from her face, leaving her looking completely hollow and utterly destroyed. "I hope those diamonds draped around your neck are real." I continued, my tone dropping to a low, merciless whisper that carried flawlessly across the room. "Because you are going to need to pawn every single one of them just to afford a cheap bus ticket back to whatever miserable hole you originally crawled out of. You gambled your entire future on a broke criminal who owns absolutely nothing today." Sierra slowly turned her head to look at Julian. The realization that she had been utterly, completely played hit her with the devastating force of a speeding freight train. She had spent years believing she was securing a future with an incredibly wealthy, powerful attorney. She had gleefully participated in the brutal humiliation of his unsuspecting wife. Now she was staring at a penniless, highly exposed felon who was about to spend the next decade rotting inside a federal prison. Julian reached out a trembling hand toward her. "Sierra, please," he begged, his voice whining and pathetic. "We can fix this mess. We can leave the city tonight." Sierra did not hesitate. She raised her right hand and slapped Julian directly across the face with such brutal, incredible force that the sharp cracking sound echoed loudly over the shouting crowd. Julian's head snapped violently to the side, a bright red handprint blooming instantly on his pale cheek. "You absolutely disgusting, pathetic liar!" Sierra screamed, her voice thick with hysterical rage. "You told me you were a millionaire. You told me she was nothing. You ruined my life, you absolute monster. She shoved him backward and turned fleeing toward the exit. I watched her sprint away, her ridiculous train dragging heavily across the marble floor. I felt absolutely zero sympathy for her. She had willingly, knowingly engaged in a malicious affair and gladly spent money she knew belonged to my family. Now she would face the brutal, unyielding reality of absolute poverty. With Sierra gone, I shifted my gaze toward the final targets of my corporate execution. Vanessa and Calvin were standing near the catering station looking completely paralyzed. Vanessa was breathing rapidly, her chest heaving as she gripped her husband's arm. Calvin looked utterly bewildered and deeply, profoundly terrified now. I took a slow, deliberate step toward my treacherous sister. The crowd quieted, slightly eager to witness the next phase of this spectacular public slaughter. "And Vanessa," I said, my voice dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. "Since you enthusiastically and actively laundered that stolen money through your fake, pathetic little non-profit organization, Calvin's precious accounting firm will likely be audited by the IRS by tomorrow morning. I sent my full investigative report directly to the federal authorities 3 hours ago. They have every single fraudulent wire transfer and fake invoice you ever signed fully documented and securely, heavily verified." Vanessa let out a sharp, terrified squeak. Her eyes darted frantically toward Calvin. Calvin was a deeply conservative, highly risk-averse man who valued his pristine professional reputation above absolutely everything else in the world. He stared at his wife, his face contorting in sheer disgust and unmasked horror. "You laundered stolen funds through my business accounts," Calvin whispered, his voice shaking with absolute rage. "You committed federal tax fraud under my name." Vanessa reached for him, her hands trembling wildly. "Calvin, please," she sobbed, tears streaming down her ruined makeup. "Julian told me it was totally, completely legally safe." Calvin violently ripped his arm away from her grasping hands. He looked at her with an expression of pure, absolute revulsion. He reached down and aggressively grabbed his gold wedding band, twisting it forcefully off his finger. He threw the heavy ring directly onto the floor, where it clattered sharply against the polished marble. "I am completely done with you, Vanessa," he snarled, turning his back on her. He walked rapidly toward the main exit, leaving his sobbing, hysterical wife standing completely alone in the center of the gallery. Her entire privileged existence had evaporated in seconds flat. Finally, Beatrice, the proud, arrogant mother-in-law who had relentlessly tormented me, dropped heavily to her knees. Her elegant silver gown pooled around her on the cold floor as she stared up at me with tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "Naomi, please," she begged, her voice cracking with pure desperation. "Please do not ruin our family name." I looked down at her, feeling nothing but cold, empty silence. The flashing red and blue lights of multiple police cruisers suddenly illuminated the tall gallery windows, washing the opulent room in the harsh, unforgiving, flashing bright colors of absolute final legal justice. 2 federal agents in dark windbreakers, flanked by a dozen uniformed Atlanta police officers, marched through the massive brass double doors of the Vanguard Gallery. They moved with absolute terrifying purpose. The sea of wealthy investors, elite power brokers, and panicked socialites instantly parted for them. Nobody wanted to stand anywhere near the blast radius of Julian Sterling. The lead FBI agent stepped onto the elevated velvet platform. "Julian Sterling," he announced, his voice booming over the rising chaos of the opulent room. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny." Julian did not fight back. He did not yell. He simply collapsed inward. His broad shoulders slumped, and his famously arrogant posture evaporated as the cold steel handcuffs clicked sharply around his trembling wrists. The satisfying metallic sound echoed loudly in the suddenly silent room. He looked up at me one final time, his eyes begging silently for a tiny ounce of mercy he never once showed me during our entire miserable marriage. I simply turned my back on him, completely unaffected. Across the expansive room, Sierra was aggressively pushing her way toward the catering exit. She had kicked off her diamond-encrusted heels and was sprinting barefoot across the polished marble floor. A female police officer intercepted her effortlessly, grabbing her forcefully by the arm. "Let me go!" Sierra shrieked, thrashing wildly against the officer's tight grip. "I did not do anything wrong. I am a victim here." The officer forcefully pinned Sierra's arms directly behind her back. "Ma'am, you are being detained for immediate questioning regarding the knowing receipt of stolen federal funds," the officer stated calmly. Sierra began sobbing hysterically, her flawless, expensive makeup running down her face in thick, ugly black streaks, as they marched her out the front doors, directly behind my ruined ex-husband. The gallery erupted into absolute pandemonium the exact moment the police cruisers finally pulled away. The subsequent fallout over the next 4 days was brutally magnificent. It was a masterclass in swift, total corporate destruction. Federal authorities aggressively seized every single one of Julian's remaining assets. His luxury sports cars were towed away from his pristine suburban driveway in the middle of the dark night. His hidden offshore bank accounts were instantly frozen solid by aggressive government mandates. The Vanguard Gallery investors filed a massive class action lawsuit against him, ensuring he would never see a single dime outside of a miserable prison commissary for the rest of his natural life. But Julian was merely the first domino to fall in this glorious sequence. Beatrice Sterling had her entire sheltered world dismantled within 48 grueling hours. Federal investigators rapidly discovered that she had actively knowingly helped Julian hide the stolen escrow funds in various shell companies disguised as legitimate retirement portfolios. As a direct result, the government instantly froze her entire pension and seized her sprawling luxury country club estate. The proud, arrogant matriarch who had constantly mocked my middle-class upbringing was suddenly facing absolute, total, devastating bankruptcy. Vanessa faced an equally devastating reality. Calvin's pristine accounting firm initiated an immediate internal audit. When they uncovered the vast, undeniable extent of her money laundering through her fake charitable organization, Calvin filed for an expedited divorce. He publicly severed all personal and professional ties with her and willingly handed all her financial records directly over to the relentless IRS agents. Vanessa was now facing multiple severe federal charges of extensive tax evasion and major fraud. She was securely locked out of her own beautiful home, and her premium credit cards were entirely declined at every single luxury boutique in Atlanta. The powerful Sterling family empire was rapidly reduced to absolute total ash. They had built their entire identity on a highly fragile foundation of lies, theft, and immense unearned arrogance. I sat comfortably in my new, expansive corner office at Caldwell Holdings, watching the financial news networks extensively cover their spectacular public downfall. It was profoundly, deeply, intensely satisfying. On Thursday morning, my head of corporate security called my private line. Desmond informed me that Beatrice and Vanessa were currently standing in the lobby of my heavily guarded corporate headquarters. They were aggressively demanding to see me immediately. "Send them up," I instructed, my voice perfectly calm. "Let them finally see exactly who they are dealing with now." The heavy brass doors to my executive suite swung open. Beatrice and Vanessa slowly stepped inside. The physical transformation was absolutely staggering. They were completely stripped of their pristine designer clothes, their expensive jewelry, and their deeply arrogant, smug attitudes. Beatrice wore a plain gray sweater and ill-fitting dark slacks. Her previously pristine, perfectly coiffed silver hair was unstyled and flat against her skull. Vanessa looked even worse. Her eyes were severely red-rimmed and horribly swollen from endless days of crying. She wore an old, wrinkled trench coat and clutched a cheap, basic canvas tote bag. They looked completely broken. They stood awkwardly in the center of my massive office, staring in absolute awe at the towering floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the vast, majestic Atlanta skyline. They were finally standing inside the very powerful empire I had built, while they were busy mocking my mere existence. Naomi Beatrice started, her voice trembling weakly. "We urgently, desperately need your help. We have absolutely nowhere else to go." I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, steepling my fingers together carefully. I remained completely silent, forcing them to endure the heavy, entirely uncomfortable atmosphere of the room. Vanessa stepped forward, hot tears spilling fresh down her extremely pale, hollow cheeks. "Calvin left me," she sobbed, her voice cracking painfully. "He took the house, the cars, the bank accounts. The IRS is actively, aggressively threatening to officially indict me by Friday afternoon. I am going to lose absolutely everything, Naomi. Please, you absolutely have to help us. You are my sister." I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that echoed loudly against the pristine, thick glass walls of my office. "Sister." I repeated the word, tasting like pure toxic poison on my tongue. "You did not act like my sister when you gleefully helped my husband steal money to finance his disgusting affair. You did not act like my sister when you actively, maliciously conspired to leave me completely penniless on the street. You gladly, proudly participated in my intended total destruction, Vanessa." Beatrice dropped heavily to her knees right in the exact center of the plush carpet. The proud, arrogant mother-in-law, who had spent 7 long years treating me like absolute garbage, was now kneeling before me, weeping openly. "Naomi, I am begging you," Beatrice cried, clutching her shaking hands together tightly. "Please do not let them take my home. Please do not ruin our family name permanently. We have lost everything. We are entirely, completely ruined. Show us some mercy, I beg of you." I looked down at them, feeling an incredible, massive surge of pure, icy power coursing through my veins. The sterling women were kneeling on my floor, desperately begging for their survival. I slowly stood up from behind my massive mahogany desk. I walked gracefully around to the front, stopping just inches away from where Beatrice kneeled. "You wanted me to be the ultimate scapegoat," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet whisper. "You wanted me to be the pathetic failure you could constantly mock, to make your own sad, fraudulent lives feel superior. You gladly, actively cheered for my total, inevitable destruction." Vanessa let out a loud, tragic sob, violently burying her face in her trembling hands. Beatrice stared up at me, her eyes wide with mounting terror and desperate hope. I stared back at them, letting the harsh, unforgiving reality of their situation completely crush them. "I have the immense, overwhelming power to annihilate both of you right now," I continued. "I have the vast financial resources and the undeniable concrete legal evidence to ensure you both spend the next decade rotting in federal prison right alongside Julian." I let the heavy threat hang in the silent room, watching them physically, uncontrollably shake with intense fear. "However," I said slowly, pacing a slow, highly deliberate circle entirely around them, "I am a pragmatic, highly ruthless businesswoman. I deal in complex transactions, and I always deal in maximum leverage. I will officially, completely drop the civil lawsuits against both of you. I will instruct my formidable legal team to intentionally, safely withhold the remaining internal documents from the federal prosecutors regarding your direct, undeniable complicity." I watched their tear-stained faces instantly, beautifully light up with a pathetic, desperate hope. Beatrice gasped loudly, clutching her chest in pure, utter relief. "Thank you, Naomi," she cried out, her voice breaking. "Thank you so very much." But I interrupted sharply, my voice slicing brutally through her premature, pathetic gratitude right now. "I will only do this under one absolute, strict, and entirely non-negotiable final single condition." I pulled two thick manila folders from my heavy drawer and slapped them hard onto the polished wood. "You will both legally sign agreements detailing exactly how you will pay for your specific crimes," I stated coldly, watching them flinch. "Vanessa, you are going to legally sign away every single remaining share of your vast inheritance from our parents' estate directly over to me. You will forfeit absolutely everything they left behind forever. Furthermore, as part of your heavily documented restitution, you will complete 500 hours of mandatory community service. But you will not be sorting canned goods at a quiet suburban food bank. You will complete those hours working as a basic janitor right here in the main lobby of Caldwell Holdings. You will meticulously mop the marble floors that my executives walk on every single day." Vanessa gasped, choking on a fresh wave of hysterical tears, but she did not dare interrupt me. "And Beatrice," I said, turning my cold gaze to the kneeling matriarch, "you are going to attend your beloved elite megachurch this coming Sunday morning. You will walk up to the main podium, and you will publicly, explicitly confess to your entire wealthy congregation exactly how you willingly, actively helped your criminal son steal millions of dollars from innocent clients to fund his cheap, disgusting affair. You will tell them all the absolute, unvarnished, ugly truth about your deeply corrupted family and your own personal, monumental moral failures." Beatrice let out a high-pitched, agonizing wail of pure, absolute horror, clutching her chest wildly. "Naomi, please," she begged, her voice trembling violently. "I am on the senior advisory board. They will instantly excommunicate me. I will be a total, complete social pariah in this city." I leaned forward, resting my hands flat on my desk. "Then you can comfortably share a tiny concrete federal prison cell with your beloved son for the rest of your miserable life," I replied, my tone completely devoid of any human sympathy whatsoever. "It is entirely your choice, Beatrice. Sign the binding confession agreement right now, or I call the FBI field office back and hand over the offshore shell company routing numbers featuring your deliberately forged signature." The heavy, suffocating silence that followed was broken only by their pathetic, jagged sobbing echoing off the glass walls. They were completely cornered, entirely out of options, and permanently stripped of every single ounce of their fake manufactured pride and fake dignity. Vanessa reached out with a violently shaking hand and picked up the heavy gold pen resting beside the manila folder. She quickly scrawled her signature across the extensive documents, officially surrendering her entire financial future to me. Beatrice, weeping so hard she could barely breathe, blindly reached up and took the pen next. She signed the binding church confession agreement, sealing her total, utter public social destruction. 6 wonderfully peaceful, prosperous months quickly passed since that spectacular day of absolute total ruin. I stood near the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my gorgeous corporate suite, holding a steaming cup of expensive black coffee. My company was thriving beautifully beyond my wildest aggressive projections and breaking industry records. The massive acquisition of Sterling and Vance had stabilized perfectly, yielding absolutely unprecedented quarterly profits across the entire global board. I glanced over at the large flat-screen television mounted securely on my office wall. The local morning news anchor was delivering a highly anticipated update on the city's most infamous corporate scandal. Julian Sterling had officially been sentenced to 12 long, grueling years in a maximum security federal penitentiary, without any possibility of early parole. The screen flashed a brief, humiliating clip of Julian wearing a bright orange prison jumpsuit, looking incredibly aged, deeply hollow, and utterly defeated by the relentless justice system. The news segment shifted quickly, displaying a recent grainy paparazzi photograph of a highly recognizable Sierra. The former aspiring socialite was now working the deep fryer at a cheap, greasy fast food diner on the absolute worst side of town. She wore a stained polyester uniform and a ridiculous paper hat, her previous glamorous life nothing but a fading, pathetic memory of a stolen fantasy. I smiled, taking a slow, highly satisfying sip of my hot coffee. Then I looked straight down through the pristine glass panels to the expansive marble lobby of Caldwell Holdings, directly below my massive office. Vanessa was down there, wearing a baggy gray janitorial jumpsuit, pushing a heavy yellow mop bucket across the highly polished floor. She kept her head bowed low, deeply ashamed, desperately avoiding the sharp, judgmental gazes of the wealthy corporate executives and brilliant attorneys bustling past her. My highly efficient corporate security team ensured she did not miss a single grueling minute of her mandatory, humiliating community service, watching her every single daily move. The heavy oak doors of my office swung open gracefully, interrupting my peaceful observation. Desmond strode confidently into the massive room, looking exceptionally sharp in his tailored dark suit. He walked directly up to my desk and placed two thick, luxurious envelopes precisely on the polished wood surface. Everything is fully secured and completely ready for the upcoming European Expansion Summit, he announced, his professional tone carrying a distinct hint of genuine satisfaction. Business trip to Paris, ready to go. I turned away from the massive window, leaving the spectacular view of my completely conquered enemies far behind me. I set my coffee mug down and confidently picked up my sleek black leather briefcase. The heavy, crushing weight of the past 7 grueling years was entirely, completely gone forever, replaced by the thrilling, limitless potential of my absolute dominant, independent future. I looked directly at Desmond and smiled, a bright, sharp, genuinely triumphant expression, letting the absolute joy of my total victory sink in completely. Always, I replied smoothly, adjusting the lapel of my custom-tailored exclusive designer jacket. But this time, I am officially buying the whole plane for us. Fade to black.